Namaskar and welcome to this exciting new episode of Sattology Debunking Mythology. Today we are going to take on a topic which is very interesting for many viewers. Is the global Chinese influence, whether it's influence or disinfluence, I don't know. But let's talk to a very good friend of mine and also a very popular political analyst and strategic affairs analyst, Sri Abhijit Iyer Mitra. So
Hi,
welcome,
Makai.
Abhijit. So, uh, Abhijit, like it has been seen that the Chinese factor is creating a lot of headaches for everyone in USA and I think around the world too, in India also. So, what is that the Chinese influence is on USA, first of all, from your perspective?
The Chinese influence is very curious. On one hand, it's a very crude, brute force, blunt strategy. They're not sophisticated like the Russians. On the other hand, it's clearly a strategy that works because if you manage to give everybody financial interests in China, it basically compromises your entire political system. Tell me one politician in the USA today who isn't dependent on China or whose companies on whose boards they sit, who pay them to sit on their boards, or who they seek jobs from, or whose children are in business, don't have an interest in China. It just doesn't exist. See, it's the kind of uh, uh, political compromise that only a heck of a lot of money can lead to. And this is something Russia and the USSR could never do because they never had a private industry. They never wanted your investment out there, right? But it's something fundamentally that China can do. And in many ways, this is kind of what America did to Britain as well. It is what led to the Franco-British alliance as well, that, you have so much by way of investments. Of course, the Franco-British alliance was kind of different, but you go from fighting each other. They came in the early 1800s and burnt down the Capitol and the White House and all of that, British troops. But then because of the trade interlinkages, Britain and America had to come together. So it's one of those, but see, Britain and America had a lot of shared values at that point. Leave aside the fact that America is a genuinely capitalist country and Britain was a mercantilist country. And, a lot of people don't understand that difference because mercantilism is one of the worst corruptions of capitalism that you can actually ever have because it completely destroys the role of capital in society. Right. But in the case of China, when your value systems are so completely different, when somebody is very clearly an enemy, imagine the president, well, he's still not the president-elect as far as I understand it. He's just Joe Biden, the presumptive winner of the 2020 presidential election, says when he's asked, Russia is a strategic adversary, China is merely a strategic competitor. That is that there is the crux of your problem. And what you're going to see is that, China doesn't want you to say, China isn't a dragon, it's a cuddle bear, it's a panda bear. Go watch all these nannies dealing with panda bear cubs. That's what China is. That they don't want you to have that opinion of them. What they want the administration to do is make a lot of noise about China being the enemy, but do nothing about China being the enemy. Right? So anything that Biden says, so Biden will come up with an extremely bellicose speech on China, and they'll all go gaga saying, oh, he said things that Trump never said. But if you actually look at his actions, he'll probably end up undermining all the steps that Trump took against China. Let me give you the example of Obama. Initially, if you remember, a lot of people have forgotten how clumsy and inept Obama actually was on foreign policy. And nobody will say that in DC because everybody was on the take, right? The government used to give money to every think tank. So to keep the money flow running, you have to say that Obama's, the Pope's ass or something like that. But in Obama's case, he initially came up with the G2 concept, which was America and China would dominate the world and create a duopoly around which everything had to move. Then he decided, oh, it probably not a good idea. Of course, nobody criticized the G2. Then he said, no, 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 not a good idea. We're going to move towards something else, which is going to be the China pivot, the Asian pivot, which was that instead of being Eurocentric, the policy was going to be China centric. What people don't realize is that as part of that Asia pivot, nothing happened. No real forces were moved. It constantly, American foreign policy, American defense policy constantly remained Russia centric. And quite the contrary, when Australia aligned itself to the Asian pivot as well, what you see happening is that instead of being about 800 to 700 kilometers away from the Chinese shore, US troops were actually moved back 1,200 to 1,500 kilometers. And every single think tank was applauding this as the greatest anti-China move or whatever, when in fact it wasn't. It was actually handing over territory to China on a golden platter. When Japan, got into a bit of a conflict with them over the Senkaku or the Diaoyu Islands, whatever you want to call them, Chinese and Japanese versions of the same thing, Obama's response was, our responsibility to Japan is only if Japan is attacked, implying that the Senkaku wasn't Japanese territory. So if it was attacked, America was under no obligation to protect Japan. Right. So you will see the same thing happen all over again with Biden. Mark my words, you will hear a lot of anti-China rhetoric, but you will see the bank account handed over to China.
Very well put. And I think something has been sold to American public, especially some sections of the Democrat, the fear of China, big time, that Chinese are going to overtake our country, USA, and Chinese are going to overtake, and from Indian perspective, India has always viewed China as a competitor, and they're trying to fight it off at the borders without any fear. I mean, apparent, I can say. But in the American public, the fear has been sold much, much more than even in India. I mean, what could be the strategy behind it?
I assessment of the way India has dealt with China, because even after 20 of our troops were killed in June, we still can't bring ourselves to say China. We issued a condemnation without naming the country that killed our troops. Okay, so India is quite feckless in these things. And largely they're undermined because, what you see, what I've described as the American sort of handicap with China, it is far, far greater with India. At least in America, you have fairly good counter-espionage and counterintelligence that tells you who has what interests where. The problem, of course, is that it's the establishment that has all those interests because they're all linked. This is the problem. When your intelligence community is linked to your industrial community, which is linked to your arms community, which is linked to your political community, all the industrial deals also effectively end up becoming political deals, which end up becoming establishment deals, which end up becoming, military interests, or at least portrayed as an interest in containing China for order for more weapons and crap like that. In India, our counterintelligence is absolute rubbish. The higher up you go, the less scrutiny you're under. So you're far, far more compromised than America is. So Galwan, post-Galwan, we may be standing up, but it is nothing compared to what needs to be done at the moment. We're still too scared to say China is an enemy. Strategically, we're still so schizophrenic. We can't bring ourselves to admit, the government can't bring itself to admit that China is enemy number one. We still can't bring ourselves to admit that America is our friend. So you're clearly a lot more optimistic about India's future than I am. I don't see India going very far in this century.
There is one thing which I have seen with the Chinese is, and especially from an American perspective, I can say very bombastic language they use. And sometimes it's without emotions. And like, for example, uh, America banned some Chinese diplomats, and there was a tit for tat reaction by the Chinese. Now, very few people, few countries do that. They may not have the strength, but they do it. So, is that their strategy of deniability, or what is the mindset of the Chinese when they do such kind of things? And especially when I talk about Joe Biden and other people like this side of the political spectrum, they they are so scared of China on many levels. Like they claim to be in fact the US military
Let,
is
let
like
me let me give you the parallel of what happened in India. Do you remember the Indian diplomat Devyani Khobragade?
correct.
And full disclosure of interest, she's a very dear friend of mine. Devyani Khobragade, who's now our ambassador to Cambodia, when she was arrested in New York, when she was posted to the UN in New York, based out of to the Indian consulate in New York. What happened was India threatened the US ambassador because the US ambassador at the time was a gay lady. They said, technically, if you can arrest our diplomats for violating your laws, homosexuality is illegal in India. It was at that point of time. So we can arrest the partner of any diplomat who is here illegally or engaging in illegal actions, which was a direct threat to the US ambassador because she had a girlfriend, life partner, I don't know what. Okay. We removed all the security barricades outside the US embassy. We told them to shut down their commissary shop because, unlike, your American viewers won't know this, but, India is still, you don't get much by way of imported products. It's impossible to get good pork products here or beef at all, good wines or anything, because we've got like 400-500% import duties on good wines. So a really trashy wine in America that sells for about $7 a bottle would sell here for about $70 a bottle. So, all these embassies, they have their own duty-free import shops, which only sell to other diplomats. We forced them to shut that down. We forced them to shut down membership of their gym for other diplomats and things like that. Now, if China does anything like this, we will keep absolutely quiet and do nothing. Why? Because we know America won't retaliate. We also know what the Chinese will do will be several orders of magnitude greater than what we can do. So, in India, I don't know what it is. Is it because of the caste system or because of hierarchy? The higher up the ladder you go, the more obnoxious the behavior. The lower down the ladder you go, the more obsequious and, submissive the behavior. So the more obnoxious you act with India, the more we cower. And with the Chinese, because they are so in your face obnoxious, everybody down from the prime minister to the president will just bend over backwards to appease the Chinese. But when the Americans come at us with even a reasonably sensible request, not that the arrest of Devyani, that was just plain wrong. But then, look, I've got a conflict of interest here. I admit that openly. Would be completely the rhetoric you get on that is next level. And this is the classic case of the mouse that roared.
See, the entire Chinese economy built up by Eisenhower and later on US presidents is built on American purchasing power. The entire American purchasing power today is because of cheap Chinese products, to be frank. That's where the economy is right now. And economic leverage has been used by China in a very disdainful manner in the US, like buying off election officials, buying off the election software company. Now, all these things are happening very open. But but what do you think, according to you, is American weakness in responding to this Chinese aggression?
Right. So I think it wasn't Eisenhower at all. It was more to do with Reagan and George Bush and people like that, because they were cognate with Deng Xiaoping. Remember, Mao Zedong did absolutely nothing for the economy. It was entirely Deng Xiaoping and his successors. So yes, China was built up by America in that sense. The Chinese economy has been the Chinese economic surplus, the Chinese economic boom has been based on American demand and to a lesser extent European demand over the last 30, 40 years. Right. But this is where China succeeded, where the USSR failed, because the USSR didn't understand the market economy. It couldn't exploit a market in that sense. It just couldn't go. I don't think the Chinese have bought election officials. I think the Democrats are corrupt enough and crooked enough to do that themselves. They don't need the Chinese to do it. The Democrats could teach the Chinese a thing or two about corruption. In fact, I think compared to Democrats, the Chinese are far ahead on human rights. The Chinese don't go around invading countries, destroying governments, destabilizing whole regions the way Democrats do. And the problem is there is no feedback loop. They keep making the same mistake over and over again, and they keep patting themselves on the back over and over again. Fine. Everybody wants to blame George Bush for going to Afghanistan and Iraq, which is like, oh, catastrophe, calamity, blah, 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 blah. But then, when Clinton started, remember, Clinton started this with Kosovo. Okay, Clinton started this with Kosovo, with
Bosnia.
Bosnia. He's the one that started this principle of humanitarian intervention. But of course, and he was responsible for the subprime mortgage crisis as well, but they'll never blame him for it. They'll only blame George Bush for it. Okay. And then, of course, when Barack Obama does the same thing, destabilizing Syria, thankfully, he didn't go full on into Syria, but then tried the same stunt with Libya. Okay. And between Libya and Syria, the amount of destabilization Barack Obama did. Nobody has destroyed the European project more than Barack Obama through all these so-called humanitarian interventions. It's basically led to this whole influx, which has destabilized the tolerant nature of Europe, which is fine. They were also living in a dreamland, fairy tale castle. And now this immigrant influx has basically reduced their tolerance level. It's led to the rise of the far right and whatnot. Completely natural, because none of the European citizens were asked, do you want to welcome these people? It was just shoved down their throat and they said, if you don't welcome it, you're racist. Okay, it's like somebody telling me that my property, my house, but if the squatter from next door, I don't let him in, I am somehow a piece of shit. How many, and this is what I want to ask people. Why doesn't the Obama family, they've got a big mansion somewhere in DC around the Adams Morgan area, I think. Why doesn't he allow about 70 Syrian families to settle down in his house with him and make Michelle Obama cook meals for them every day? He'll never do that. All right. He wants to pass that entire thing on to everybody else. Angela Merkel won't do it. I suspect she won't let a single bloody refugee into her house. So, or Hollande would have never done it. But, these people, they are so deeply destructive. They are the worst, lowest common denominator kind of identity politics playing schmucks who destroy their countries, but they are celebrated as great liberating heroes. And, it is the nature of a democracy that you love demagogues who destroy you. You're carried away by their speeches. There was Mussolini's great speech when that I think it was delivered from the balcony of the Quirinale Palace. I think, I'm not too sure, where he announced Italy's entry into World War II. And the comment about it was like a great opera. You're there to listen to the performance. You're not there to understand the words. And that is what Obama's entire career is. Okay, it's like an opera. It's the delivery is great. The words sound very good. The substance of it is zero. And in it, when Mussolini entered the war, he basically admitted, because unlike the German leadership that was heroin-addled, everybody in the German high command was injecting themselves with heroin, Hitler downwards. The Italians went. They knew. They tried to avoid the war because both Mussolini and Count Ciano, his foreign minister, knew they were going to lose. And Mussolini admits, we're going to lose this, but we're still going in. He admits it in his speech. But still they went in. And, this is pretty much what Obama does not do. He never admits. He gives a speech. Everybody goes ga, 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 ga over it. I mean, this is a guy who won a Nobel Prize for giving a speech. Can you beat that? Okay. And this is the kind of crap that is celebrated in America these days. I think, it's Will Durant, the historian, used to say this: a country doesn't destroy itself from without till it's destroyed itself from within. And when I look at America and what the Democrats are doing to this country, I can see it is not China that is going to destroy America, it is America that is going to destroy America.
That's true. I think you quoted very accurately. The internal factions that destroy the country. Anybody
And
out?
just to bring in the dharmic angle, don't forget, this has happened in our own history. When
Right.
you go to the Buddhist canon, there is the story of Amarapali, right? And this has happened during the life of the Buddha himself. That at this time there was a great conflict between the monarchies and the republics in northern India. India had republican governments long before Athens did, and this wasn't just a city republic. It was a large republican empire, several republican empires, several thousands of square kilometers. You could say the size of Massachusetts or more. Some even the size of the state of New York, almost some of them were. And the Lichavi Confederacy was a republic to the north of Magadha, which was the greatest of the kingdoms. And the king invaded. And what happens is that the strength of the people is so great, he can't defeat these people. And the king gets captured one day. He doesn't reveal who he is, but he gets captured one day. And these people are very open to people coming in. So he weasels his way into the heart of the chief courtesan. In those days, remember, courtesans, here today you call them whores. In those days, the sexual arts were considered the greatest refinement. They used to treat courtesans the way you would treat Bollywood stars, or the way France treats chefs. You were entitled to public office, and this lady, the chief courtesan, she held public office. Almost kind of like a secretary of state of the whatever. And he falls in love with her, she falls in love with him, and he uses his time in there to undermine the unity of the people. And when he has completely succeeded in undermining those people, he tells the Magadhan army, come, I have softened them up for you, invade. So this time when the army comes, it is the people, they are so distrustful of each other within the Confederacy itself. They open up the gates of the city for the army to come and invade. And that is what you are seeing today in America. And of course, the sad end note to this, because it's a romance, is that at the end of it, she realizes that the man she was in love with was the enemy king. And she is completely distraught. So she gives up her life of pleasure and love, and she sees the Buddha going by. So she becomes a Buddhist nun, and she follows the Buddha. And sources vary. It is either Bimbisara or his son Ajatashatru who seduced Amarapali. But he realizes that he truly fell in love with her. He didn't want power after all. So he gives up the kingdom, and he also turns into a monk and goes there, follows the Buddha. But these are romantic endings. They don't happen in real life. The reality is that the Lichavi Confederacy, when Magadha attacked, because this democracy had weakened itself so much that when the enemy attacked, they themselves opened the doors for the enemy. It has happened historically before. It will happen again, and America is on that path today.
So, coming to these, do you think that the biggest American export has been democracy so far, and they have sold it in the last?
No, this is a huge anthropological and technological misconception that democracy is an American export. All right. America was very, very happy doing businesses, toppling democracies and doing business with dictators. You need to understand, when did most of the countries in the Western Alliance become democracies? Okay. Turkey has gone back. But Greece, Spain, Portugal, Taiwan, South Korea, to some extent, Singapore as well. They're a very controlled democracy, but at least the people are very happy there with control. The people there like control. They don't vote for anybody other than their own government, and the elections don't get rigged. But all these countries, they all transition from dictatorships to democracies, not under American pressure. They all transitioned in the 80s. And why do they transition in the 80s? Very important question to ask. Because, from ever since the manufacturing revolution started, you needed a strong state. That is where the state's monopoly of violence comes in. And that manufacturing phase lasted right up to the 70s. Okay, where you needed a strong state to manage the social disruptions, because the social disruption of industrialization is so great. Britain lost a quarter of its population to industrialization. The French Revolution started because of the after effects of industrialization. When Russia tried to rapid industrialize, it led to the Holodomor and things like that, all the famines, and that is what led to China's famines and things like that as well. Deeply destructive process. It is in the 80s that the digital revolution starts. And what the digital and the information revolution do is they require the state to take a back seat and for the individual to take the front seat. So 200 years of industrial reality were discarded by the end of the 1970s when the 1980s begin. And so any country that prioritized its economy and its people over itself naturally democratized, because in order to remain economically viable, they had to turn into information economies, which is what they all did. And that is why they all democratized. What exactly happened in the 1980s in terms of political pressure? Do you ever remember Reagan or George Bush demanding democracy all over?
No.
None of them actually cared. They didn't. They just didn't. End of story. I remember in the 80s, it was under Reagan that this man, Marcos, was given the Congressional Medal of Freedom. Can you imagine a horrible dictator like that being given the Congressional Medal of Freedom? Reagan did it. So remember, America supported the Pakistani genocide of Bangladeshis in 1971 as well. So don't give me this crock shit about democracy being an American thing. Democracy has nothing to do with America. Okay, this was an anthropological phenomenon brought about by industrialization and the third wave of industrialization, which was the digital and information age. So that is what you are looking at. It is not an American export. It is sort of a natural anthropological progression.
So when we talk about, you said it right, that America has propped up dictators, supported dictators. I mean, the biggest example is Gaddafi was heavily supported by Americans until they killed him. Until Obama killed him. And do you think that with the Obama era, the decline of American exceptionalism has also come?
Far from it. I think, well, look, America never got along with Libya. Let's also be clear about that. They didn't actively try to get rid of him. Because not that Gaddafi was a very nice character. He was probably good for Libya, but he wasn't good for anybody around. And therefore not even good for Libya, because remember, he hunkered down under sanctions and all of that, and he basically destroyed his own country in that sense. That's a different matter. I actually find that even though people try to make out that Republicans are the American exceptionalists, it is in fact the Democrats who are the most dangerous American exceptionalists. And I'll tell you why. Do you remember that TV show called The West Wing?
True.
Complete, utter crap. I have never come across a bigger shit writer than Aaron Sorkin, who gets celebrated more than anybody else. Do you know why he gets celebrated despite all the mediocre crock shit he produces? It's because he caters to the American self-image of themselves, not to the reality of who they are. Okay, it's very easy to seduce a person. You go tell a tiger, go into a tiger's cage. I mean, imagine a tiger was a sentient being. You go tell the tiger, you're a horrible creature. You kill things. You just kill things that you don't even kill things for food. You just kill them because they come into your territory and things like that. You're a horrible creature. The next thing, the tiger is going to kill you. But you tell the tiger, oh, Lord Tiger, you're so sweet. You're the king of the jungle. Everybody loves you. Such a noble creature you are. La-di-da-di. The tiger's going to be, yeah, okay. I might not kill you right now. So the self-image, your own image of yourself is very different from the image that other people have of you. And the problem with the Democrats is their delusions of American grandeur are so extreme. It's like the self-delusion about themselves. You ask anybody in the street, they'll tell you Hillary's an intensely dislikable person. She's a murderess. She aided and abetted all the rapes by her husband. But you ask Hillary herself, or you ask her husband, or you ask her daughter, they'll tell you that Hillary is the Virgin Mary herself. Right? They'll say the Virgin Mary was soiled compared to Hillary Clinton. Chelsea was born through immaculate conception. I mean, it's quite possible that Hillary's never had sex. She's a frigid bitch, but that's a different matter. Quite besides the point. The whole problem in all of this is that you have this enormous self-delusion, no understanding of the dangers of what you are doing, of a spoiled brat who is never told about the dangers and the enormous destruction you cause. In that sense, exactly like Rahul Gandhi is what the Democrats are, but much smarter. The Democrats are much smarter than Rahul Gandhi. We should compare anybody to Rahul Gandhi. That's very insulting to the Democrats. Are actually conniving bastards, but they're not as dumb as Rahul. So no, I apologize for that. I withdraw that remark. But it's that same self-reinforcing echo chamber that they live in, this delusion of American grandeur, this self-image that isn't actually the reality. I think the Republicans are far, far more grounded in reality.
Generally, we have seen that the most of the I would say conservatives or patriots are more grounded in the reality than the, I would say, the philosophical edge living people, like most of the Democrats.
There's this Marine colonel, he came out with a paper, why state is from Venus and defense is from Mars. Now, if you actually look at the voting preferences of state and defense, you'll find state tends to be monopolized by Democrats and defense tends to be monopolized by Republicans. And you can tell that in your interactions with state. You never get a direct answer. It's all esoteric mumbo jumbo that you get out of state. With defense, it's always yes, no. It's always a can-do attitude. It's always a certain humility in dealing with people. They're like, yes, we can do this. No, we can't do this. This is our limit. This is, we can. With state, it's just insufferable. It's like when you go into state, you're like, please get me the hell out of here. I'd much rather have a colon irrigation than have to spend another 10 minutes in this bloody building with these godforsaken pieces of shit.
Now, coming back to this, the global influence in the strategic aspects of India, like when you compare Indian influence on US is practically negligible. We may celebrate whatever that we have a yoga day and the soft power of Indians, but there is a soft power of yoga, not India. India has done nothing to export yoga other than the International Yoga Day, which is a big deal also, but doesn't still, there is no policies, no books, no guidelines, no official undertaking that yes, yoga is from India. They don't say it. So, but still they're claiming it. So
I don't think there has been any community on earth that has been so any diaspora on earth that has been so insignificant in international politics than the Indian diaspora wherever it's gone. Especially when you see this mental change happen. And that mental change somehow sets in around 700 to 1000 AD. There's a fantastic new book by Joseph Henrich. It's called Weirdos, Why Weird People... just check it out. I've forgotten the entire title because I read it about 3-4 months back. I've forgotten the title. But Joseph Henrich, Weird People, something. Let me just search for it while I'm talking to you. And what he says is Europe started thinking differently sometime back. And that is what led to European leadership across the world. It is a genuine mental change that Europeans think, and by extension Americans as well, think different from, yes, Joseph Henrich, The Weirdest People in the World. Read that book. Something also happens in the Indian psyche sometime around 700 to 1000 AD. We stop being violent. We lose our sort of militaristic edge in that sense. And from there on, the decline starts. I think the real point where the military decline starts is around 750 AD or so, when India definitively discovers the zero. The moment we discovered the zero, we decided as a civilization we would collectively reduce ourselves to a zero. We were so taken in by the zero, we decided we are going to become a nation of zeros. And that is what we did. We turned ourselves into a third rate nation of zeros. So what happens is the Indian mindset changes, and from there on, see, all the impact that happened before Angkor and all happened before that, by the waves before that, and to an extent up to say about 1100 maximum, but not beyond that any further. It starts off in the north, it starts progressing down south. And after that, you look at a single Indian diaspora. What change or contribution have they brought to any other country that they have migrated to, culturally, aesthetically, anthropologically, or anything? Zero, zilch, nada, zilch. Okay, we are going on exporting things that were invented over 1,000, 2,000 years back, claiming it is our inheritance, which it clearly is no longer is. Right? Somebody has done yoga, somebody has done Bharatnatyam or Odissi or whatever, and you are claiming you have done it. And what is the point of it? Today, 75% of the Indian diaspora in America voted for Biden, and for a vice president that has called for a military intervention into Kashmir. Thankfully, what you're now going to see is that all this wokeism in college, which is going to go to the next level under Biden, they have decided to launch a war against all Asians and Indians because apparently we get into colleges too often. So I want these children of the 75% to all get into begging on the streets, because that is what they're going to do now. Because all their privilege is going to go, privilege, quote unquote, inherited privilege. And they're all going to be out on the streets begging or living off food stamps. And that is exactly what they deserve. Karma is a bitch. That is one great Indian invention, karma, that I'm hoping comes to the American community in America.
No, that was my fifth book. Karma is a bitch.
I know. That's why I weaved it in.
And yesterday we had a book launch for that. Yesterday evening for that book. So I mean, you live in India and you have such a right perspective about US, and I really commend you on that, because exactly that's the point. Because when these Indian Americans, today also I see so many WhatsApp messages where they're blindly, even they're not even negotiating with the Republicans also. I mean, Muslims may be small numbers in Republicans, but they're negotiating very hard. So every single time the Republicans get a vote from a Muslim community, they negotiate. But the Indian American community is not negotiating anything. Blind support. Like in politics, nothing works. In politics, if you don't ask, nothing happens.
My family are registered Democrats who hate Trump. I'm not going to give you their names because I'm too embarrassed to name them, but my family, without, except probably my niece, they all voted for Biden and Kamala. My niece, thankfully, have brainwashed her enough to vote the right way.
But when in politics, when you do not ask, nothing happens. And one of the things which I have noticed is, any direction you vote, but you first demand your rights. You don't, in politics, you don't get anything handed to you. Nobody is doing a largesse on you. Nobody is doing charity on you. Everyone has their own motives to promote. But I think the naivety is so high, and you said very rightly that the Indian American community claims to be the richest community. What it means is somebody is going to snatch those riches. It's just like the frog croaking. If the frog is making a noise, a snake is come to eat it.
I'm really hoping that you have a revolutionary government in America. They determined the Indian American community is a product of both caste privilege from back home, being overwhelmingly upper caste, as well as having unfair privilege in America, and decide to nationalize all their properties. They deserve socialism. Indians deserve socialism. And I really hope you get hit, not you personally, but the 75%. Unfortunately, you'll have to also have to bear the brunt. But at least for the 75%, I hope you get hit by socialism. The train wreck, the disaster that is socialism, because you deserve socialism.
No, that's the biggest danger to US. So according to you, what is the biggest danger to US? Is socialism, communism, or Chinese?
America itself, the way America is going. See, the problem is, when as long as the manufacturing revolution happened, the people who used to get jobs were people who actually mattered, who had real skill sets. Whereas humanities, if you look at it, 70 to 90% of it is just complete bullshit. Okay. And the problem with the information age is it created such a huge trail of service jobs, essentially providing employment to the chronically unemployable. If you've seen the latest exchange between Google and the so-called diversity ethics person, some person that got sacked yesterday or day before, you're thinking, who the hell is this nut job? They're not. You couldn't employ them as a maid in the house, damn it. And this person was apparently some high-profile AI ethics person employed at Google. So it's created this whole trail of employment of humanities, of gripe essentially, who now have this thing that, this uh, uh, thing that for so long humanities was treated as shit and science was glorified. Now we need to, crush these science guys. Because, facts are now bigotry. You know that, right?
Yes.
Facts are bigotry. Beliefs are what matters. Feelings are what matters. Because, it's not science that sends rockets to the moon. It's feelings that sends rockets to the moon. And that is what they're doing to America. The biggest threat to America comes from within America. You won't realize this now. I think a lot of your viewers are going to be very upset with me for saying this. But say 40, 50 years down the line, when the decline of America becomes evident, you will realize what took you down. And it won't be the Chinese. It won't be socialism. It won't be communism. It was Americans. Socialism is merely the weapon that they will use to take you down. But it isn't what took you down. It was Americans who took down America.
No, I think that's what the universities are teaching in USA in big time. And I think most of the products of the American education system, they are self-defeating in many ways. And I think they're highly apologetic. American apologism is the biggest problem today.
The US universities are the biggest beneficiaries of wokeism. I'll tell you why. When Harvard runs a science or a physics course, they have to invest a huge amount of money setting up a cyclotron or a reactor or whatever. The experiments cost money. Facts cost money. On the other hand, you can expand by 90% your capacity to offer shitty courses, trashy education for the chronically unemployable, called the humanities. It costs nothing to run. Tell me, what does a humanities course cost to run other than the trashy faculty you're going to hire for it? Nothing. You can hire trash faculty, pay them about $80,000 a year. You can, give studentships to complete trash who would be uneducatable otherwise, charge them $120,000 a year. 50 students per class, $120,000 per year, with an outlay of just about, say, $300,000-400,000 on 4 or 5 professors. That's a huge cash cow. So, Harvard and all these universities, they benefited from providing garbage education to the chronically unemployable radioactive trash that infests their campuses today. But they've made a lot of money doing it. So good for them. At least they're smart.
There's a lot more to discuss with you on this. I think I think you have great insight into this Chinese mindset, and I think probably it will be a jolt to many of our American students who are going to watch this video. So thank you very much. But next topic I've already decided based on this talk. The big tech social media, is it suppressing voice or actually accentuating voice? And we need to cover that shortly, as soon as possible. Thank you and namaskar. Thank you very much.